Hi, I'm Teresa Coenen with Stitchin Quilts, and welcome to our From Marti and Me Club demonstration. This month we're featuring the pattern Lazy Afternoon and Marti's template set, Set B. I hope you'll enjoy as I show the demonstration on how to cut the fabric to complete this quilt. We constructed our store sample using a fabric line called Woodland Summer by Holly Taylor with Motive Fabrics. The sample's behind me. Let's take a closer look at that sample. The quilt Lazy Afternoon was named after a fabric line that Marti designed called Lazy Afternoon. Certainly wasn't named that because it only takes an afternoon to make. It took me more like a full day. The quilt measures 54 by 54 as a wall hanging. The pattern also includes fabric requirements to make a throw or a bed-size quilt. The quilt's very simple to make using template B with 3 basic blocks. The Jacob's Road block, which is in the corners, the weather vane block, which is the green block that you see in the on the 4 sides, and the center block, which is the rolling sawtooth star. Let's take a look at Marti's pattern. This month we're using Marti Michelle's pattern that's exclusive for Marti and Me Clubs called Lazy Afternoon. The finished size of the quilt is 54 inches. Go ahead and open up your pattern and we'll discuss each page as we move along. On page 2 you see many pictures of different types of quilts that can be made from this pattern. On page 3 she describes how Marti describes her motivation for the pattern itself. Page 4 and page 5 discuss why people should use templates and what sort of blocks are included in template set B. Page 6 and page 7 has some ideas to consider before starting. Marti describes how we should cut our strips, the importance of grain line and the arrows on the templates, how to cut our fabric in pairs and chain piece, the importance of a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and how to use cutaways to make new shapes. We'll be using this method as we do our center sawtooth star block. Page 8 shows the wall hanging, and page 9 shows the fabric chart. This quilt takes 8 different fabrics, and Marti encourages us to take a swatch of the fabric and include it on the chart. I also labeled each one of my fabrics with stickers so I wouldn't get confused as to which fabrics went where. On page 10 we begin our instructions for constructing the quilt. It's very important to note that at the beginning we cut the borders and the binding before we begin cutting the blocks. The reason why we do that is so we can cut the borders from the length of fabric, and that way we do not have to have a pieced outer border. Make sure that you read the border cutting instructions very carefully before beginning your blocks. If you prefer to make the throw quilt, you're going to want to turn to page 14 where Marti has the instructions beginning for the throw quilt and the yardage chart for the throw quilt. If you prefer to make the bed-size quilt, you're going to want to turn to page 24 and 25 where Marti includes the instructions for the bed-size quilt and the cutting chart for the bed-size quilt. In the back of Marti's pattern book, beginning on page 28, Marti includes the paper templates. You do not need to use her template set with the plastic templates, but it certainly is much easier than trying to cut your fabric out of the paper with the paper templates. Remember last month when I told you sometimes it's important to make notes in your pattern? This would be a point where you're either going to want to take some notes for your pattern or you're going to want to use sticky notes. Beginning on page 10, I've got the actual dimensions or the numbers of strips that you need to cut for each of the block units. Those aren't in Marti's directions, so you might want to take note of those now. Under cutting, borders, and binding, when it's talking about fabric A and cutting from your 1.5 yard piece from the length of fabric, ultimately you're going to need to cut two strips each that are 43 inches long and 54 inches long. On fabric F, you're going to need to cut 2 strips each that are 39 and 43 inches long. On fabric A, she calls for you to cut 4 strips that are 2 1/4 inches wide. Your first strip will end up being cut 36 1/2 inches long, and your second borders will be cut 39 inches long. Let's move on to the Jacob's Road block. The very first fabric that you're going to cut is fabric A, but you've already cut border fabric from the length of fabric, leaving you a remaining piece. You're going to use 1 strip that is cut from the length of fabric. For fabric B, you'll need to cut 8 number 8 squares and 4 number 12 squares. You can do that from 1 strip of fabric. Number 3, it has you cutting fabrics C and D. You're going to need to cut 2 strips. You can try it in 1 strip, but depending on your selvage, you may not be able to get all of your blocks out of 1 strip. Marti points out when sewing your blocks for the Jacob's Road block that you should be pressing toward the dark fabric on your half square units. She doesn't always give you pressing directions, so I'll give you pressing directions as well. When you complete your Jacob's Road block, you're going to want to make sure that you press to the outside. In cutting the weather vane blocks, you will need 2 strips of fabrics F and C. You'll need to cut an additional 2 strips of fabric C for steps 3 and 4, and you will need to cut 2 strips of fabric E. You also will need to cut 2 strips of fabric G. In step 4, she tells you to complete the pieced corner units. Make sure that when you press those, you're pressing to the dark square. In step 1 of making the side center units, make sure at the beginning you're pressing to the outside. When you put your block together, rows 1 and 3 will be pressed to the inside. Row 2 will be pressed to the outside. As you complete your entire quilt block, you'll make sure that when you put your rows together, you're pressing to the inside. Now we're on to the final block, the rolling sawtooth star. From fabric F, you need 1 strip. From fabric C, you need 1 strip. From fabric D, you'll cut 4 squares from the length of fabric. When you're making your 4-patch units, you'll fan the seams and press open. I'll show you more detail on the video. When completing your square and a square blocks, press to the outside. And when you're constructing your final block, for the first and third row, press to the outside. For the center row, press to the inside. As you put the different rows together, press them all to the outside of the block. When you're putting your rows together, your top row and bottom row should have the blocks pressed to the outside. The center row should have the blocks pressed to the inside. That will allow you to nest the seams as you piece your quilt top together. When you do have your quilt top pieced together, press your row seams open. This month, when we make Lazy Afternoon, we'll be using Marti Michell's Perfect Template Set B. Set B includes a 4-inch center square and several companion templates that can make a variety of different blocks. Set A and Set B have the same templates, but they're in different sizes. In order to demonstrate how many different blocks can be made, Marti also came up with a book called The Perfect Patchwork System, which is an encyclopedia that includes a variety of blocks that can be made from Set A or Set B. Page 5, Marti indicates the different types of templates that she has in template Set B. It begins with a 4-inch basic square and then has the half square unit and the square point on point. It includes number 11, which is the triangle, quarter square triangle unit, number 12, which is the quarter square unit. Number 13, which is a half square of that smaller quarter square unit. And number 14, which is a quarter square of that smaller quarter square unit. You'll note that all of Marti's templates work together seamlessly because of those perfect engineered corners. See how the half square fits right onto that square. As you get your template set, go ahead and peel the backing off the templates. It's important that you need to be able to see through your templates to your fabric below. So go ahead and take the time to peel the back of your template sets if you've not already done so.